This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Sean Cole, but the star of today's show is the Control-R interface by Sim Racing Hardware. And right out of the box, you can see this is no ordinary button box, or more of a button box extreme, or an interface as they put it. And that really goes back to what Sim Racing Hardware is all about, or how they came to be. They're just a group of motorsports gaming enthusiasts who at the time weren't able to find the type of controllers that they wanted, so they just went ahead and built them themselves, and from there they had a fan base, people wanted them, and a long story short, now you have the Control-R available to just about anybody in the world. Focusing our attention back on the Control-R button box, I will say it is just like any other button box that you can get out there on the market. However, there are a few distinct qualities that make this unique, or at least different from most of those other button boxes that you can get. Now, for starters, the price point is way beyond what you would expect from button boxes in general, and this comes in at 225 British pounds, which ends up being 367 US dollars or 286 euro. Now, to see what we get for our money, let's go ahead and take a tour of the Control-R button box. Now, before even getting it, I had seen a bunch of pictures online, and to be honest with you, I wondered, was it as nice as those pictures? Was this just some fancy photo work, or does it really come through when you really get it in person and in your hands? Now, when I got it here in the studio and I opened the box, it was immediately apparent to me that this box was identical to those images, an extremely impressive looking box with super realistic looks about it. The Control-R interface comes with a top row of 3 differently colored rotary encoders. They are identified with 16 different positions, but functionally each click left or right would represent a different button. There is a good amount of resistance on the rotation and a slight rubbery feel to the dial. The next section down are 3 different button groupings. 4 red ones in a square on the left, each labeled with numbers 1 through 4. 4 more red buttons in a square on the right, labeled 5 through 8, and 2 black buttons in the middle dividing them. These buttons have a hard plastic feel to the touch and have a click that you feel as well as hear when pressed. There is enough pressure required on the buttons that you are guaranteed not to accidentally press a button by touching it lightly. The next section down has a 4th rotary encoder, also labeled with 16 positions and functions identically to the ones on the top row. To the right of this dial are 3 toggle switches labeled as Auxiliary Panel A. Rather than momentary switches, these are actually pulse switches. This works out great for mapping them to things that you want on or off, like overlay windows, headlights, or any other accessories desired. Again, these switches are heavy duty and provide a very positive click that is both felt and heard. The bottom row of the Control-R is another couple of these toggle switches labeled Auxiliary Panel B, and to the right of that, a 5th rotary encoder that has been fixed with a custom dial that clearly labels it as being intended to be used as the brake bias forward or backward adjustment. It works just like the other 4 encoders, but the dial gives it a much different feel when turning it to each position. This gives you a total of 25 different button mappings, or 30 if you count on and off with the toggle switches. The Control-R is the largest button box that I've ever tested. It actually measures a whopping 9 inches tall, 6 inches wide, and 3 inches deep for the thickness of the box. There's a really cool Control-R by Sim Racing Hardware label at the top, logo. It's actually a acrylic, very stylish label, but it does increase the height by an additional 2 inches. The plug-in area is in the top portion of the box and hidden slightly by that top logo. There are 4 threaded mounting points on the long side of the box, 2 on each side. These can be used with any mounting methods or along with the acrylic mounts that are provided by SRH. When mounted via the mounts, it does raise the box up slightly and gives it an overall height of 11 inches. These mounts also give the Control-R a setback angle of about 30 degrees that really gives it a center console from a real car look about it. This setback angle will take up about 7 inches front to back. Once the mount is added, the installation is very easy and can be drilled into place on any flat surface. In my case, I made a section of profile tubing and was able to mount it in a location that both looked perfect and was also functional. Now before we move on to how it actually worked while driving, I want to talk about the way it does plug in. It is USB plug and play, and your computer will automatically pick it up. It's only PC compatible. It's no Xbox or PlayStation compatibility. On the top, behind the logo, as I mentioned, you have a mini USB to regular USB plug for plugging it into the PC. Then you also have what looks like sort of an RCA type jack, red, white, and yellow, that is for future expansions. So what that means, there's actually an intended gauge stack that will mount right to the side of this. There's also a secondary box that would go behind it, and probably the reasoning for that additional 2-inch lift to make clearance for that box to be on the tabletop or whatever you're mounting it to. Now when it came to using the Control-R out on track, I was very pleased. The layout is very nice layout. I mean, rather than squeeze too many buttons, they definitely went with that minimalistic open space, made it very easy to identify each control without even looking out. You just kind of knew where they were. It was very simple, very intuitive. Having the labeled groupings and color combinations made this even easier and prevented me from needing additional labels. The rotary dials had just enough tension to prevent multiple turns, and that was another additional benefit when reaching out without looking to make an engine mapping or traction control adjustment to the car. The same goes for the buttons, and when accidentally touching the wrong button, it wouldn't be enough to click it. You really had to press with intention. I also really like to have the type of buttons that work like an on and off switch. When it comes to sims that recognize headlights, windshield wipers, or just wanting to be able to make your heads-up displays come and go with a simple on or off like a light switch. And I also really enjoyed having the clearly marked and super easy to find brake bias adjuster. Now we really are only talking about a button box, and the Control-R might be one of the nicest button boxes that I've ever tested. But let's go ahead and break it down by going over the good, the not so good, and the bottom line, starting out of course with the good. Now number one, this is a very high quality button box. It is also a very good looking button box. It has a great layout and great use of space. Nice diversity of buttons, switches, and dials. Easy mounting solutions. Comes with its own mount, set back at about 30-degree angle. Expandable add-on gauges and a second box. Plug and play compatibility. Looks like a real panel from a real race car. Now let's move on to the not so good. And I really honestly would like to say that there weren't any not so good items. I love this box so much. However, I have to hit it for being expensive. This is expensive to a point that some people might just completely be out of the ball game right out of the gates. And the only other con I have is with the additional dial mounted to this rotary, it's actually a little easy to turn. So that's something that I would like, is maybe a little bit more stiffness out of the brake bias knob, but that's a very minor complaint. The bottom line is this: the Control-R interface is a very high-end button box, and it's really intended for a particular type of sim racer. This is the sim racer who goes all out on their rig, spends any money necessary when it comes to having the best of the best, wants the most high-tech, coolest looking gadgets or button boxes, and it's perfect for that person. On this table, I have a wide variety of button boxes, and they work their way from very inexpensive, where you're not going to have much realism, you're not going to have much tactile feedback when it comes to using the box. Very functional, does all the same job of this one, but there's really no comparing the two. Then in the middle, I mean, here I have a DIY box. I probably have about $100 into this. I've got some displays and added things, sure, but these are very cheap, inexpensive buttons. They're never going to hold up to the duration of either of these button boxes on the left. Here I have the Derek Spear button box. This is only about $90. Has almost as many buttons, and functionally they're the same. And this is a gorgeous button box. Nothing to take away from this one. This is nearly a perfect button box. But you can see there is a little bit of a difference when it comes to the overall visual effects, mostly the mounting solutions and other things. This one's pretty much taking care of everything for you, and that's a big deal. The other thing is, for me, I'll usually use a label machine to identify all of my buttons, mostly to help me from getting confused while racing. In the case of this one, I'm sorry, it was too gorgeous. I just didn't want to put any stupid stickers on it And the layout made it so easy for me to remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, they all could be memorized by me. 1, 2, 3, very simple layout. This one you can't forget, and that's all very good. I also really enjoyed the setback angle and the mount that it did come with. Almost no button boxes that I've ever received have actually come with the mount included in the design, so that's something that I really appreciated. And like I said, that angle that you have it at, that's the angle of my center console in my car. It just had that perfect visual effect for me. And honestly, I can't wait to see what this thing looks like with the additional gauges also mounted to it. So I think that's everything that I can tell you about the Sim Racing Hardware Control-R interface or button box, whatever you want to call it. To get more information on this button box and other products by them, head over to simracinghardware.com and you can check it all out for yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. This is the Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.